Ex-cult members. What's your "oh crap, I'm in a cult" moment? I was sent to a troubled teen program in my mid-teens. I honestly had thought it saved my life. I volunteered for it for a few years after I graduated. My family was also fully invested in it. We were all pretty brainwashed. It wasn't until I started reconnecting with other survivors that I realized that what we went through wasn't okay. I started having nightmares of being sent back 3 or 4 times a week. I remember stumbling across a documentary on cults. It had a checklist of what makes a group a cult, and it pretty much checked every box. Accepting it was a cult really helped with my whole deprogramming process. It's been 25 years since I graduated the program and 15 years since I deprogrammed. Some of the cult-like behavior consisted of things like shaving all the boys' heads and giving us matching uniforms to strip away our identity. The group you were assigned to was called your family. We called the person running our family father/mother or papa/mama. We had our own lingo that was hammered into us. All of our communication with our parents was heavily monitored. We got 1 phone call a month after being there for a few months, but we had someone sitting next to us the whole time ready to hang up if we said something bad about the program. The bulk of the brainwashing took place in monthly seminars. They used starvation and sleep deprivation tactics during our seminars. A lot of the processes we did in those seminars were lifted from other cults like LifeSpring. Once you had gone through the seminars, you would then staff the newer kids' seminars as part of the process. Towards the end, before graduation, they even had us talk to potential parents about our experience and how it saved our lives. I want to know what was in these seminars. Like, how were they claiming to change your life? Was it just a bunch of self-help stuff or like strict regimen and, figuring out your life sort of stuff? OP didn't really give us much information on that, just the fact it was a cult. I want to know what it was. It's so vague. Next story. I went to a high school that was directly connected to the church we went to. We had a required class called Cults. Half the class was learning about cults. The second semester was, this is why people say we're a cult, and this is why we aren't. I was like, oh, crap. That is something a cult would say. Next story. I joined a church on my own without my family at 14 years old. Shortly after that, my family moved. I conspired to run away before the move, with help from some adult members of my church. The plan didn't work out. Years later, I was telling the story to a friend. In my mind, I thought it was a funny story about how stupid I was as a young teenager, but telling the story out loud made me realize how much danger I had been in and how lucky I was to escape. Next story. My grandfather hadn't seen me in 10 years. We had moved overseas and left the Jehovah's Witness church. You'd expect a grandfather to run and hug his granddaughter as tightly as possible after 10 years. He just stood there. He was visibly in distress, kept looking around to see if someone was looking at us, not even interacting, just standing 3 meters from each other. Oh, I thought. We didn't leave. We were shunned, and he's scared of someone seeing him talk to us degenerates. He said not a word to us, just stood there. It was my birthday, but no birthday wishes from Grandpa. Wouldn't have had a birthday anyways. Next story. I once was bored and let the recruiter on the street in LA in front of the Scientology building shoot their shot. He was super nice, very respectful, and very well trained on how to immediately form a small but meaningful relationship with you. Shortly after this, a beautiful girl came out to meet me. She was able to get me inside. Seconds after, another beautiful young woman came, and together they did the same thing to me the first guy did. I just ended up leaving once the hard-to-sell older lady came in and tried to get me to sign some stuff and go down some steps into some room with the 3 of them. I realized right then and there that not only does their pitch work, but they could easily get someone who didn't go in knowing they were a cult into their trap. I felt myself wanting to continue. Next story. It took years to realize. I was 12 to 13-ish, and my eldest married sister got me and my 5-year-old sister into her church. But having to ask the pastor for permission to go to a college football game with my father. No TV, no dancing, no pants. Skirts or dresses below the knee, no sleeves above the elbow, no cutting of the hair, only Christian music, mandatory street service once a week, no makeup, no jewelry, no silver or gold watches, and church twice on Sundays, AM and PM, and Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Fridays. 10% tithes and minimum of 5% offerings. Offerings at least once a week, but every service was preferred. There's loads more, but those are the highlights off the top of my head. Next story. Grew up in a Baptist church. When it came time for college, there was a list of pre-approved Bible colleges that the pastor and church were okay with. However, I chose to go to a public college, California State University system, to pursue computer science. Pastor lectured me about how the school would brainwash me into believing evolution and teach me to turn my back on the church. This raised red flags because they were essentially trying to control my educational decisions. Eventually, I moved away to the college that I selected and into the dorms. A couple weeks into the semester, the pastor's son and son's wife were touring and walking around my campus asking random students if they knew where to find me. This is in a city they had never heard about until I had mentioned I was going to this college. Freshman year for winter break, I decided to go back to the church for the Christmas Day sermon, and the pastor made sure to mention my college by name in his lecture on how the world is trying to corrupt our youth. Pastor started writing letters to the campus to request that they expel me because they're corrupting my soul. Eventually, he gave up after a year. School and I sent a cease and desist letter. Never heard from the church again. This is scary because you can tell that the pastor believes what he was saying. To try that persistently and to continue saying that rhetoric to people who obviously wouldn't understand it, you have to truly believe it. And I think that's the scariest part. This wasn't some, recruitment or retainment tactic. There weren't, sinister machinations behind it. This dude was just serious. Next story. My ex was in a Christian cult for a while in college. She got kicked out because she was outspoken about women's rights and human rights. Only a notable highlight was all the cult members married each other and named their kids weird things. One daughter was named Scarlet River. Next story. I was taught throughout my childhood that the pinnacle of life was going through the temple. Then at age 19, when I finally went to the temple, an old man put olive oil on various parts of my naked body and gave me a secret new name. I then dressed in white robes, a funny baker's hat and leaf apron, and exchanged secret handshakes and performed various chants and vows. I then had to speak through holes in a veil to a man on the other side who was supposed to be God. God then pulled me through to a new room once I did the right handshakes and recited the right things. All of this kind of cemented in place the idea I was raised in a cult. Later I learned that the temple ceremonies I partook in, circa 1990, were recently softened from their original form, which had pantomimed death penalties, throat-slitting, disemboweling, etc., and vengeance oaths against those who wronged the prophet. I'm probably wrong about this, but is this Mormonism? I swear I've heard a lot about the temple in reference to Mormons, but I don't know. It's not my bag. Next story. Don't know that I was there long enough to call myself a cult member, former or otherwise, but I met this girl on Yahoo Chess. I'm sorry, I couldn't take this seriously. Yahoo Chess, man, are you kidding me? There's no way. Anyway, sorry, I'll keep going. I met this girl on Yahoo Chess in the early 2000s. We played together a lot. Both lived in the DFW area, so after a few months, we met for coffee. She was cool as crap. We hung out for a few hours, and then she invited me to a party with a friend of hers. We go to this nice house in NRH. Hanging out, people are friendly, but they all keep talking about Jonah like he's the greatest thing in the world. About an hour in, Jonah comes walking out and everyone is cheering and crap, and he starts talking, brothers, sisters, and it hit me. Ah, crap, this is a goddamn cult. They honey-trapped me. I saw my way out quietly and never played chess with her again. This is the funniest way someone's been indoctrinated into a cult. Or attempted to be, at least. There wasn't a recruiter. There wasn't anything on TV or an ad in the newspaper. No, it was someone you met and formed a genuine connection with on Yahoo Chess. Cults really will try anything, won't they? Next story. Some close relatives were and still are very deep into evangelical Christianity. They got hooked into what was known back then as the Jesus Freak movement. It was extremely odd. Hours-long church services multiple times a week with people dancing and crying and collapsing and speaking in gibberish. People lived in the church building sleeping on cots in the attic and basement. Church leaders would come into town wearing fancy suits and speak about the need to donate everything you had to the church to, quote, bring more people into the fold, even though most of the people who attended were very poor and from the inner city. There was a big 2-week trip on church buses every year to the church headquarters in a different state. Lots of weirdness there. There was a school only for the church kids, there was a musical group that toured all over the country, etc. They absolutely refused to talk about why they left. When I read a book about Jonestown and People's Temple, the parallels were insane. They weren't part of that, I don't think, but it was the same playbook. Next story. Grew up Mormon, was an all-in true blue believer. Watched a documentary about how the JWs were caught covering up horrific child abuse, and I thought to myself, well, that's what you get when you're not the true church. Then news broke about the Mormons covering up abuse with hush money and shuffling offenders around. That broke right through my cognitive dissonance and made me realize, in that instant, it's all made up. Next story. You aren't allowed to bring a black kid home to mom. My brother talking about my Haitian friend to me after finding out I had a Haitian friend. The cult? MAGA. I was 14. I was 15 when my mother screamed at me she wouldn't raise a Democrat in her household. 17 when I was kicked out of the family/cult for not having similar hateful ideologies. Other cult signs were when my mom was scammed out of $25,000 from a MAGA apocalypse training group in Texas that she was going to on a retreat to learn how to survive after the eventual apocalypse due to Obama. A TV on in every room with Fox on 24/7, including the kitchen, was also a pretty clear sign by the time I was 16. Next story. I left the religion I grew up in off and on after conflict with one of the local leaders. Still thought they were totally legit, but I was just a terrible person who didn't belong. At some point, I had a half-formed idea to write a book about someone accidentally becoming a cult leader or accidentally following God and ending up leading a cult. But I didn't really understand what cults were or anything, so I decided to research. I wasn't working hard on it. I was just poking at this and that. Jim Jones was my first step, and taking my time at it. Mostly just taking in these stories while trying to shape what I might want to write. Eventually, after following enough rabbit holes, I realized two things. One, I'd never write that book. 2, I was having a hard time realizing what the difference between a cult and a religion was because I'd been raised in a cult. I stopped blaming myself for how I'd left and started accepting that it's okay to be a human being. Any religion that preaches it's better to be dead than be the victim of assault is kinda super toxic, and I was right to run. Next story. I didn't know until a few years after I left when I found out the organization my mother works for has a page on the Cult Education Institute website. Earlier this year, the Southern Poverty Law Center also finally officially designated the place a hate group. So, that's fun. My mother still works there and likely will until she retires, and the rest of my family still fully supports the work the place does. Next story. When I was a kid, my mom went through an intense born-again phase. That I believe was part of a religious psychosis brought on by the trauma of her mother's death immediately after she'd had 2 miscarriages back-to-back. That meant life was weird in certain ways for several years, including, among other things, for a time attending 3 different churches simultaneously. Friday night service at one church, Saturday at another, Sunday at our home church. Yeah, she was tithing to all 3. Being a kid, I was dragged along for the ride. At one point during this stretch of religious weirdness, she joined up with a church that was led by a guy who lived in a huge house in the middle of nowhere. Mom is originally from another country, and the pastor and all of the congregants were first-gen immigrants from that same country. This was a major part of the initial draw. The support of a community with people who had a similar background and cultural connection she wasn't getting elsewhere. Because I was raised monolingual, English only, I generally had no idea what the hell was going on. But as a teen with a burgeoning true crime interest who was reading online about things like Jonestown, I had my first, "this seems like a cult" moment the very first time we rolled up to this guy's property for church. I immediately noticed my mom and my aunt's then partner among a bunch of other congregants all doing heavy labor. For example, land maintenance and construction on the property, taking care of his mini farm, crops, animals. I was curious and asked what was going on, and was told it was typical for all the adults to spend their time outside of work at the pastor's property helping him out. One of the men told me that they'd come out there every Sunday before the sun rose to work for many hours before it was time for church. They were all very proud. I had another "this seems culty" moment when we were setting up folding chairs in what was a very nice living room and decorated very churchy. Banners hanging on the walls, a pulpit/lectern, but still very much a living room. Because I was part of a church family at the church where I'd been baptized, I was familiar with the idea of pastors/priests having gone to seminary to be educated on the context and meaning of the scripture they were teaching from/about. No one would give me a straight answer on where this guy studied, and kept getting told variations of "God speaks to him," because the sermon was in a language I didn't speak and I was fidgeting with boredom as a result of the entire time. I was able to successfully make the argument to my mom that it was better for me to stay home so I could focus on homework than attend a church where I couldn't understand anything being said. After that, that, I was mainly only brought out to that church and their gatherings when they needed extra hands for some kind of physical labor that didn't really require communication. I ended up outright telling her she was in a cult when she ended up as the chauffeur for the leader's mother. After prompting a conversation asking why everyone in the church spent so much time working on his property, the answer I got was that we were all servants of God, but that as a specially blessed servant chosen to lead the others, the pastor was ordained by God, and that serving him and his family so as to enable him to focus entirely on spreading the scripture was a righteous calling and act. Her not being willing to be on call 24/7 as a driver to make his life as convenient as possible was on the same level as turning down a direct order from Jesus, apparently. The only reason she left the cult was because the IRS came after the leader. He ended up abruptly fleeing the country with zero warning or notice. The members just all kind of shifted to other, mostly actual churches. As far as I know, no one involved ever heard from him again. He just took all the money and ran. Next story. Not a cult member, but I have a buddy of mine who's in the family tree to one of the biggest cults in the Philippines. It's akin to Scientology on how they treat their members. They've attempted to assassinate a former minister who is now in asylum in Canada. They also successfully assassinated others as well. My cousin is also part of this church. So, at what point does a church or religious group become an army? Because I would argue that when you are assassinating political leaders, you're an army. Next story. Religious organization used to tell everyone it was biblical to process up so they could manage and track all rumors and information. When I rose the ranks and was in the senior meetings, we would discuss what to do if someone in a group had a relatively normal question, what is this church's stance on gay marriage, etc. And we were always told to question the question about why would they want to know that? Are you gay? What's your understanding of what the Bible says on this? Do you want me to ask the senior pastor? He'll want to know why. It was total bullcrap diversion tactics because it turns out that other than the lead pastor, no one on staff had been to seminary, so no one knew anything about the Bible or could form an opinion. Their job was just to squash potential dissension and ostracize those with questions. I split shortly after and never looked back. Next story. I, 28F, grew up Mormon and even went on a Mormon mission. I was 24 and going through some things and right about to graduate from college. I was questioning my faith in the Mormon church but leaning more towards returning to it. I knew most of the historical crap but justified it with the church's narrative. I went to a friend's place for game night without realizing I was the only one who hadn't left the Mormon church in the room. I knew a few of them had left. When my friends realized I was questioning my faith, they started talking crap on the church. They were respectful and said they would stop if I was uncomfortable, but I let them keep going because I thought I knew it all. They brought up the second anointing. I'd once heard a rumor it was a temple ceremony where the woman accepted her husband. I guess this was important to me because I thought it would equal out men and women. My friends explained it's actually some top-secret temple ceremony where a Mormon apostle washes the feet of a couple and a woman blesses her husband, and basically after that the couple will get into the celestial kingdom, Mormon heaven, no matter what they do. They could assault, murder, cheat, and they would still make it. It's also an invitation-only ceremony, so basically, rich people get it. I thought of my parents and how they worked hard and devoted themselves to serving others, and realized they'd never get invited because they weren't rich. For some reason, it all clicked. I'd spent so much time wondering if the church was right, I never thought to wonder if it was wrong. I realized Joseph Smith was a predator, Brigham Young was an assaulter, and women are objects in the eyes of the church. Even if the church was true, I had a moral obligation to get the hell out. I drove home and said out loud, I think I'm going to leave the church. I stayed up all night researching the church from actual historical sources, and 3 days later my friend referred me to some volunteer lawyers who got my name off the church records. Parents were upset. Lost a lot of meaningful relationships that meant a lot to me, but I was able to graduate, move away with my cat, and meet new people. That was 4 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime. Next story. I went to a Southern Baptist middle and high school. My family was never in a Southern Baptist church, but I was raised Catholic and then Lutheran. In 8th grade, one of my classmates' grandfathers died, and she was crying in class. The teacher told her her grandfather must have sinned badly and been punished by God with a death. Welp, this religion is rotten all the way down. And it really was. In high school, the Southern Baptist Convention came out with a decree that said women are to obey men. men. Okay, cult. We also had weekly chapels where their highlights were a documentary about how all rock music was literally the devil. Tons of middle-aged dudes who pretended to be pastors and tried to peer pressure kids into getting saved. A panel of women who cried alligator tears about having premarital, which made them used up and dirty and disappointed their husbands. Girls who got expelled for getting pregnant and the boys who got them pregnant not being expelled. A football coach who poached black kids from the local public schools for football scholarships in the fall and expelled them from school in the spring. I could go on all day. Surprisingly, the academic side was quite rigorous and prepared me well for college, but the continual Southern Baptist clown show was intense to say the least. Next story. I used to be Mormon, and about 2 months before my wedding I got special permission to get my endowments early so I could be with my parents and grandparents in the temple. I did the initiatory first, where these old women blessed me with marrow in my bones and strength in my navel and other such things. For Mormon tradition, this is fairly par for the course. New, but not alarming. Just new sacred rituals like sacrament or baptisms for the dead. Remember, I grew up like this, so baptisms for dead people made perfect sense to me. White underwear, white dress, my little packet with my robes in it. I'd been measured for them, but I didn't know what the deal was, knowing I was going to have it all explained to me. We sit in a big room and they play a video about the creation of the world and Adam and Eve, and eventually they come to the part where Satan is basically kind of leading the couple around the world after they get kicked out of Eden. Angels come down and ask for signs, and then the video stops, and they teach us the signs. We put on the robes, and I look over at my dad, my role model, and the smartest man I've ever met in my life. He was wearing what can only be described as a white beret, but if you put a circular piece of cardboard inside of it. He was fully decked out in these robes, looking as solemn and serious as I've ever seen him. He looked ridiculous. Later, there's a moment where they invite us up to a prayer circle, and they say that only the best of feelings should be in the circle, and if you aren't comfortable, you should leave. Well, I was not comfortable at all, but my family was there, and I was between my dad and my fiancée, and I didn't want to disappoint. A running theme of my life for a while, so I stayed. It was probably the moment that I looked all around and these women had veils over their faces and men were just perfectly visible and everyone was moving their arms up and down and saying, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth," that I thought, this is kinda culty. Aw man, is this a cult? Kept quiet, finished the session, even asked a friend about it later if she thought she had felt kind of culty, and she was like, "No, it was the most amazing experience ever." So I just shut that part of my brain off for a while until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Next story. No matter what I did, how hard I tried, how perfectly obedient I was, I could never feel good about myself or my relationship with God. I flipped out after 20 years of horrible marriage and dead bedroom and got a rental house. Started enjoying life. Drank some beer and didn't immediately die or become an alcoholic. Drank some coffee and I felt happy and rejuvenated. I was intimate with someone and I felt at peace. Dated a lovely woman who treated me nicely and told me I was worthy of love and a good, healthy relationship full of enjoyable physical affection. And I didn't get an STI or have a baby I didn't want or feel like I was worthless anymore. Then I went back to my wife and stuck around for 3 more years. Went through the repentance process. Regained my temple blessings. Guess what? The misery returned. Only it was worse now because I had seen the other side. I thought it was all my wife. I mean, she was mean as hell after all. Her contempt for me was poorly hidden at best. I got divorced and married another Mormon woman, and it was even worse. Got out of the relationship and the religion. Briefly looked back, but knew it wasn't worth it. Then I had the ability to reasonably deconstruct. I didn't have to pretend to feel the spirit anymore. I could feel the spirit even more strongly at a concert than at church or the temple. It made sense. I learned about Frisson and it clicked. I'm in a lovely relationship now. I have great bonus kids in addition to my own amazing kids. I can rationally see all the programming from my youth, and I really hope my kids will see it someday too. It took a long time, multiple failures before I could figure out why it wasn't working like my trusted church leaders knew it would. The emperor had no clothes. The old men behind the curtains are no wizards, just controlling, evil men doing the opposite of what they preach. Part of me is surprised that OP went back to the church after all that. Part of me's not. When you have grown up in that environment, it is all you know. and he probably felt insane amounts of guilt for that short period of time that he was away. So going back, I'm not going to fault the guy. This kind of programming does run super deep in the psyche. I'm glad he got out to a life that he seems to be enjoying now. Because, you know what? I'd say that's pretty important. Next story. I used to go to a Catholic school which was ruled by a Catholic cult, but I used to think everything was normal until I had to change schools because the principal of the first school found out I identified as bisexual and did a very violent conversion therapy to me which left me traumatized. I thought it was something normal, but when I changed schools I talked with my religion teacher about it. I went to another religious school, and she said that wasn't okay at all. That was cult behavior. Even though I don't consider myself a part of the LGBTQ plus community anymore, I really support them though. I'm still traumatized about what happened those days. Next story. Most cult members don't experience an epiphany. I mean, some do, of course, but for most, it's an incremental process that evolves over time. There's no correct amount of time the process takes either. For some, it's quick. For others, it's a slow, steady process. Some never admit they've been conned. If you truly want to help them break free, you need to offer support and understanding, not criticism. No one likes to be told they've been played for a fool. Source. I have a friend who... It was me. Next story. I'm a former Mormon, but got out mostly on a hunch that something was really wrong, and I would die inside if I didn't. It wasn't until I'd been out for almost 2 years that I started to see how pervasive the thought control is in the church. The biggest tell. You have your agency. You can make any choice you wish. And then offering only one safe choice. Full allegiance to the church. If you believe the doctrine, well, you'd be crazy not to choose that. Another big tell. All the pay no attention to the man behind the curtain talk. Here's a doozy from the one church leader I happen to like a lot. Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. And one from another I really don't like. May I suggest that research is not the answer? And one more said while directly addressing problematic history in the church, some things that are true are not very useful. The temple ceremony, stereotypically the most culty Mormon thing for me, falls into the realm of cult-shaped. It was so boring and pointless for me that I ended up having my own parallel spiritual experiences there, and thus a positive association with temple attendance. Okay, can I just say, the quote, some things that are true are not very useful, goes crazy. That's hilarious. I definitely want to use that anytime that I'm trying to argue something and I'm totally losing. It's just the ultimate, I don't care what's right, so I win. So stupid, dude. Next story. Got roped into Amway, which was calling itself Quickstar at the time when I was 18. Yeah, 18. This would have been in the early 2000s. This happened mere months after escaping a super fundy religious upbringing. It was an upbringing that ended with my dad being sentenced to 15 years in prison on child assault charges, and my mom kicking me out of the broken household that remained before moving herself and my younger brothers across the country without me. So I was pretty vulnerable to any kind of, you belong here with us rhetoric. I bought into Quickstar both literally and figuratively. I was about 11 months deep and had recently turned 19 when I went with my upline to one of those multi-day conferences held in a big stadium. One of the speakers, who was an emerald or some such big earner, spent an entire Saturday afternoon selling his captive audience on his interpretation of the prosperity gospel. Having had a butt full of that sort of scripture-twisting bullcrap over the course of my short life, it was like a bucket of ice water to the face. I straight up ghosted my upline as soon as I got home. Next story. I grew up Catholic, but stopped going to regular mass when I hit my late teens. I wound up getting engaged to a Southern Baptist and then got a ton of family pressure to get married in a Catholic church. My fiancé was open to learning about the religion, and one of the requirements to get a wedding in the church was that we had to be counseled by a priest. We went through a few weeks of classes and had a couple meetings alone with the priest. Finally, it came time for the paperwork. The priest pushed a document across his desk wanting us both to sign it. I read it over, and it was an agreement that any children resulting from the union would be raised Catholic exclusively. That was my moment. Never went back and said goodbye to religion forever. So surely that document can't be legally binding in any sort, right? What would the damages even be? They're gonna take you to court like, little Timmy grew up to be a Jewish boy. And you know what's gonna happen with that? You're gonna get fined $80,000. That's what God would want. Like, what is this contract? Or sorry, the agreement. As far as I'm concerned, if you sign it, it's a contract, but legally that's probably not true. Next story. Literally happened 10 years ago today. I was in Kenya, grew up in an African cult. I'm Hispanic and from America. My family got in when I was around 6. We were introduced through a battered women's group, and I was in it until I was 17. I left when I went to a big meeting in Kenya. I was kind of wanting to take my own life and depressed while in the cult, and a lot of the things our leader was saying was extremely impossible to fulfill. For instance, we would have to ask the spirit over every little thing, but our leader, we called him Dad/Man of God, was the only one who could confirm it, and if we had the idea, we were stupid and had no sense. But if he told us what the interpretation of something was, well, then suddenly we were supposed to go along with it. Anyway, as I grew older, I noticed that this Christian cult was not the way, because I was introduced by an online friend to other Christian teachers who were explaining things like grace and not being perfect. They gave me enough information to really start questioning why our leader was so hateful and manipulative. I didn't have that vocab at the time. Anyway, I went to the conference to help kickstart my life to be more involved in the cult. I was supposed to take over after the leader because we were the only American family and my sisters lived with him in Africa, and while I was there, the leader started to say crazy things about being divine and being a patriarch. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned that, but these other pastors I was sneak listening to were explaining that Jesus is the only God. We never learned about Jesus. I felt sick to my stomach. Ultimately, I sat in this cult conference and prayed and asked if God was real for him to tell me what to do. Should I commit my life to our organization, or do I need to run? I heard a voice other than my own tell me, "Run. This is not from me." And boom, I got up and told my mom. I was being disowned, and I'm being pretty vague because they've poisoned people, and I've come against them hardcore, and I have a green light on me. When I was 17 to 20, I actively worked to free many women, I'm a man, who were assaulted, and assaulted by our leader, too. I've since moved very far away, but I almost had an arranged marriage and would have been a millionaire had I not left. My cult ran with billionaires and presidents of African nations. I've been in armored vehicles, escorted by the mayor's bodyguards and everything. It was a wild way to grow up. I'm actually a pastor, not of my own cult, and I love to tell my story. I feel like this is pretty, away from the crux of the story, but you can't call it a Christian cult if they never mention Jesus, right? Like, isn't that where Christianity comes from, the name? Christ? So if it doesn't mention Jesus, then it's just not Christian, unless I have a total misunderstanding of religion, which I might. Next story. I was raised in a cult of the fundy, non-denominational, Christian-specific church flavor. I'm lucky that my former legal guardians left that church after the predator allegations of the head pastor became public. My former legal guardian still defended that guy after they left, but it would have been bad for reputation if they hadn't left. I stopped believing in their dogma when I was around 11 to 12. I was able to leave when I was around 17 to 18 and went off to college. I'm 23 now and still recovering from CPTSD. I try to distance myself from my family as much as possible, though I haven't been able to go fully non-contact. I've made a lot of progress in recovery, though. Next story. The shame of not being able to speak in tongues, but also praying to God that I won't speak in tongues because it seemed really creepy and embarrassing. Ex-Pentecostal here. The creepy old men and gossipy old women who condemned others' sin, but would literally overlook all of the billions of sins they would do on a daily basis. And the predator vibes from said old men. The one time the husband of my Sunday school teacher came in to talk to a bunch of preteen girls about puberty, I still remember how enthusiastic he was about it, and how insistent he was about covering the lesson instead of my Sunday school teacher, even though we had literally never heard him speak before that. Being told to bring friends to church, but being too embarrassed to because no one ever practiced what they preached. And I knew they'd be scared off by the wailing and drama, not to mention the hypocrisy. I lost a lot of friends at school trying to convert them, but we were told in church that if we didn't save them, they would burn in hell for all eternity. Anytime a street preacher screams at me, I just feel bad for them. They've been conditioned to think that everyone is going to hell and it's all their fault unless they spend every waking hour screaming at others to try and save them. And having that constant weight on you is enough to make anyone act a little insane. I've been there. The book burnings, too. The lady who insisted that she threw a Harry Potter CD into the fire and saw demons come out. That was either one, her schizophrenia, or two, the melting plastic. The time we lent a friend our GameCube copy of Super Smash Bros. And his dad smashed it with a hammer because he said it was demonic. Oh, the irony. And I've got so many more, but those were just the first that came to mind. All this aside, I'm still a follower of Christ to this day, but I trust my own prayer and readings over a man in a suit. I've been scarred by all too many in the past. Every time I would sit in church, I swear I could feel something whispering. Not literally, it was more of a strong feeling, I guess, and telling me that this is, quote, not who I am. And that feeling overwhelmed me until my family eventually left the denomination when I was around 12. Side note, another major factor was how my secular friends at school acted more like Jesus than members of the congregation. Their kindness and love for each other was unlike anything I'd seen in church, and was a representation of everything I wanted to be. Of course, there were jerks at school too, but most of the people I'd been told to avoid were beautiful and amazing people. This, paired with the God is love mindset, is ultimately what lifted the veil for me. There was no love in that church. Next story. Grew up in this cult called Xenos. It was basically when I started gaining independence that I saw the backlash occur. I had many friends in the cult who would get really cool and unique opportunities. They were often presented with an ultimatum. Choose that opportunity, or everyone you know and love will stop speaking to you. A friend of mine was a talented musician and ended up getting a scholarship to Juilliard, which also meant moving away. Their entire family and the church came down on them. She chose not to leave, and I really feel it broke her. When I finished my degree and was earning good money, there was an extreme backlash to me seeking out apartments or going on trips. Truth was, I was making money, and in an instant I could be gone. I put so much on hold for this church, and it pains me every day. Next story. When the Maharaj sent out a call to all members to come hear an important new message in his latest video. Turned out to be a 25-minute video highlighting how much more love and joy he could spread in the world if he could upgrade his current short-range jet to a new, long-range Gulfstream jet. Cue the angelic music and glorious sunsets as the sleek jet soared through the fluffy clouds, while the melodious and reassuring voice of the Maharaj carried us all along. The jet thing snapped me out of it. I looked around at the hundreds of beaming and smiling faces staring at the giant screens and thought, what the hell? Never went to another meeting or event. Next story. It took my sister explaining it to me and pointing out things many years later for me to realize our family was in a cult when we were kids. That was my first and last experience with religion due to the fact that entering a church still gives me nightmares. So I thought it was just a really screwed up church and that everything was actually my fault / what churches did. But it turns out teaching kids how to practice ascending to heaven, selecting a single kid to pay for the sins of a group, socially outcasting left-handers, locking kids in dark rooms for entire days at a time, making kids sing the hypocrite song daily, church 6 days a week, encouraging the bond between certain pairs of kids and having mock weddings for them, and using safety pins as punishments are not normal. Next story. I volunteered at a worker support organization while in college for a few months after they presented in one of my philosophy courses. After 2.5 months of devoting 25 to 30 volunteer hours per week, door-to-door analog data input as they didn't trust computers, arranging worker transportation, they said it would be best use of my privilege, meanwhile on a pretty solid scholarship with a solid restaurant management part-time position, to pull out of school and stay at the headquarters full-time. Realized then that collective membership fees were basically paying for volunteer and leadership housing. If I needed to visit my family, they required a member of the organization to chaperone. Ran away, blocked them, then had to change my number and hairstyle to avoid the org lurkers on campus. What can I say? Their leader was hot and stylish. Next story. Tangentially, I remember the moment I realized I wasn't in a cult. By chance, decades ago, I started getting involved in a medieval research and reenactment group. It had such a wide variety of activities that it was easy to find yourself involved in one thing or another almost every day of the week. Trying out recipes, court dancing, armored combat and armor making, spinning and weaving and lace making, archaeology, the list is nearly infinite. Some friends and relatives became concerned and worried I was being sucked into a cult because it was eating up so much of my time. I read somewhere about the warning signs of a cult, such as encouraging only one acceptable way of thinking, speaking, acting, and isolating you from others by claiming only their special group could save you. And I remembered the joke within the Reenactment Society. What's the definition of chivalry? Who knows? Ask 12 knights, get 13 different answers. I've never been in a group of people with more diverse opinions about everything, and a willingness to listen to other points of view. It is the utter opposite of being homogenous. It's really refreshing. Next story. I was raised Mormon. People said I was in a cult, but it didn't really seem different than any other church. Then, when I went into the temple and participated in the secret ceremony where they taught me the secret passwords and handshakes to get into heaven, I was like, oh, So this is why people say it's a cult. Next story. About 3 years after I left, I'd kind of convinced myself it was just one guy treating me poorly. Love bombing, then public humiliation, rinse and repeat. One of my high school teachers, actually. But I found a small community of other ex-members talking and exposing practices. They encouraged members to become teachers, go into schools, target vulnerable kids, and report back on us. I thought it was a coincidence the first time I told that teacher I wanted to leave the church that they planned a retreat for the next week, but no. Next story. When the pastor gave advice to a couple about how to handle their problem teenager, they disagreed. Then the pastor told them, too bad, they had to do it. Turns out counseling was code for commanding. And bonus point, when they left the church, everyone else was very hesitant to say anything about them and almost acted like they never existed. Even a woman who had been best friends with the wife. We were relatively new to the church and were puzzled. We reached out to the family to see how they were doing, and they warned us that we could get in trouble for talking to them. Next story. When I went to take my endowments at the Mormon temple, inside I was so confused. I didn't know how to feel, but I wanted to leave. I brushed it off because my parents, who I trusted, were doing this weird stuff, so I stayed for another 15-ish years, which is also part of why I stayed in a really bad marriage for so long. I prayed and went to church and read my scriptures, all the things we get counseled to do, but things never changed. When I left, I looked back to that day in the temple and realized I knew it then. Next story. I watched a documentary for a psychology class in college about Jim Jones and the whole Kool-Aid thing. I was in an MLM, and that doc about Jonestown was eerily similar to the things they taught us. Things like no outside friends, no watching TV or radio or video games because they're negative. Any waking moment should be spent building your business. Straight out of the documentary, they used to say, sleep is a luxury, and so many other things. I noped the hell out of there after that. Next story. Well, what got me to first think, oh hey, maybe this isn't great, was when I realized I was bisexual and at the age of 11 was told to end myself rather than acting on the urge to kiss women. But the moment that got me to realize it was a cult was when my parents refused to give me my birth certificate or SSN because, quote, you would become of the world if you had the abilities those would afford you. Other notable experiences. Kid died at the summer camp for that cult, and I'm not sure he was sacrificed or not. I was baptized like 6 times and almost died multiple of those times. Was homeschooled for years, and then when I went to school, I was told to be separate from the world to the point of not talking to people. Oh, also, my family thinks that I receive psychic visions and am set to bring about the birth of a new church, so cool. Next story. I escaped the cult I was raised in until my mid-20s. Luckily, the church-approved man I married at 18 escaped with me and we're still together and oh so happily heathen 20 years later. I teach our sons a lot of the warning signs about cults, but these are the main things. 1. The first thing they will do is be overly warm and friendly. You'll feel more welcome than you ever have in your life. 2. Then they'll start convincing you that you have a problem you didn't know you had, and guess what? Well, they know exactly how to fix it. 3. Then they will start to get you financially invested. It'll start very, very small at first, but will grow until you're too broke to leave. 4. They will tell you to stop speaking to people outside of the cult, and likely tell you to stop consuming any media outside of the cult. This isolation from your past is key. And then at that point, the most extreme will have you move in with other members of the cult and will change your name. There's a lot of research around how calling you something different than what your parents call you makes it easier to reprogram your mind. Even better if it depersonalizes you like a number or something close to what everyone else in the cult has. And once you're at that stage, the weird stuff always comes up, and stuff's about to get real messy for everyone. I can't imagine the level of, basically mind control they have to get in you to change your name and have you be like, yeah, that's okay. I don't know. I'm definitely of the mind is like, if I was there, I could totally notice the signs and get out. But that's not really how these things work, is it? Anyway, I hope you're not all in cults. If you are, I hope this video was enlightening. Anyway, I need a new jet, so if you could join my cult, my group for Undersparked, it would be great. No, but seriously, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.